A continental crisis, bailouts worth billions. We'll examine the burden global gifts have placed on Greece. And more than a year since it signed the final cheque, we'll audit the actions of the IMF. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. It was the biggest rescue programme in global financial history, and the final payment of more than $90 billion to Greece was heralded as the end of the crisis. More than a year on, there is no longer talk of calamity and the end of the Eurozone, but for millions of Greeks, there is still little cause for hope. Insight's Ty Genwright reports.
It's little more than a year since Greece did something previously unthinkable for a developed country. At 1 in the morning in Athens, midnight in Brussels, the government allowed a deadline to repay an IMF loan to pass. After 5 years of borrowed money and draconian austerity, this was Greece's nadir, an economy and society on the brink of collapse. Panicked people queued at closed banks where cash withdrawals had to be rationed. The pace of the crisis escalated and the plight of ordinary Greeks has changed little. They voted in a referendum on whether to continue the EU's austerity and said no. But it didn't matter to the so-called Troika, and Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras signed Greece up to a third bailout before resigning from office.
The mandate that I received has come to an end, and we shall give you, the people, the right to decide. You, with your vote, you will have to decide if we have represented the country in a rightful manner.
In the subsequent election, Greeks chose his Syriza party again. Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras told his people to be strong. And they've had to be, as Greece weakened since its first bailout in 2010. The economy has shrunk every year bar one. Unemployment peaked at more than 27%, it's improved only marginally, and its national debt, when compared with the output of its economy, has been growing. Sunny as it might look, living in Greece has become gloomier this year. Sales tax has gone up again, at a time when nearly 1 in 4 is out of work.
The IMF, independent economists and our guys here, they've all admitted that this formula with the taxes leads nowhere, only to the shrinking of the economy.
For many, it feels like a life sentence. With canes in their hands, these older people marched and gathered at the Labour Ministry, where they burned the letters they've been sent, explaining why their pensions have been cut.
We don't live, we barely subsist. We are below zero. Our living standard is literally below zero.
And new politicians are starting to look old. Syriza, the ruling party which pledged to tear up the status quo, winning 2 general elections, has started to drift to the centre. Cabinet ministers who stand in the way have been fired and replaced, all in the name of convincing lenders that Greece is a candidate for debt relief. There is, of course, another crisis in Greece, one whose cause has nothing to do with its finances, but whose human cost is far greater. By accident of geography, Greece is the frontier that so many desperate people from outside Europe want to cross. Every discarded life jacket represents a person who's made his or her way here or died trying. The people of the Greek islands were this year nominated for a Nobel Prize for helping refugees. But when camps become overcrowded and delays too long, Nobel-worthy efforts risk becoming a tinderbox. This was the scene when migrants set fire to an EU asylum processing centre on Lesbos in September. This crisis belongs to more than just one country, but Greece is taking a disproportionate share of the burden at a time when it has so many other crises to resolve. Ty Genwright reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Vicky Price, an economist and business consultant. Vicky Price, Greece returned to growth, modest growth, for a couple of quarters. Does that mean the crisis is over?
Well, the crisis is not over by any means, but it's rather good to see that finally some positive news is coming out of Greece. 2 quarters of growth, not very big growth, but nevertheless growth, which really means that something is going on in the underlying economy which is sustaining it. And the thing that has been going on is, up to a point, the migration crisis itself has been helpful in the sense that money has been coming to Greece now to deal with it, which wasn't the case originally when the crisis really was beginning to hit the various islands of Greece. But in addition, they've had very good tourism period. The same thing happened last year, of course, because record tourist arrivals, because people were rather concerned about going to other places all around Greece which were hit by terrorism attacks, whether that was North Africa or elsewhere. And that has been, I think, a great benefit to Greek tourism itself. Now, of course, if things ease all around, that may not continue. But for the moment, a little bit of stability is rather good news.
But parts of the economy starting to tick up. A lot of people, though, still feeling the pain, and they're saying it's unsustainable. The austerity measures, which the Greek government, despite all their protests, had no choice but to implement because they were conditional on getting the money, are hurting too many people. That seems to be the argument.
Well, that has been the case, of course, for quite some time. What we have seen already is a fall in GDP of some 25%, which I think any other country, if they had suffered that, would probably have seen huge revolt taking place. In Greece, amazingly, it's been taken reasonably peacefully. Yes, there have been some demonstrations, but nothing enormous. But what we have seen, of course, with this fall in GDP is that wages have been cut back very substantially, in some cases by 35%, even more. The minimum wage is absolutely tiny right now. People with huge qualifications get 500 euros a month. Pensions have been cut back very severely. A very large percentage of the population is very near poverty lines. In fact, I think the estimate is that some 60% of pensioners are at or below the poverty line now.
So that's not sustainable, Vicky, is it?
It's
no
not.
Future for anyone, is
No,
it?
no. I think there has to be emphasis on growth. And of course, there are a number of measures which are happening right now. So the most important thing is to do enough reform so that both the Europeans and, up to a point, the International Monetary Fund can be convinced that Greece is going, or at least moving, towards a path of recovery based on reforms. Those, of course, are very difficult to do when the economy is collapsing and the welfare system is just non-existent. But nevertheless, there have been review after review which has taken place in Greece in terms of whether they are doing the things they're supposed to do. And I think finally we're now in the stage where I think we may see that the latest review which is happening now will say, fine, okay, we can now move towards solidifying the short-term debt relief that we've been talking about for some time, and maybe move forward towards longer-term relief. But so much depends on what the Germans do, the next elections in Germany. So the environment is still quite uncertain, but there is some movement.
External factors. I suppose we all are to a degree, aren't we? But Greece is particularly vulnerable to this. I mean, even something like owning your own place is now, I read, a financial noose around your neck. People are actually disinheriting their parents' house because of the taxes associated with either inheriting that or owning it, or the usual rates and running costs. So they're just too steep.
Well, what has been going on, of course, in Greece is that taxes have been going up continuously. This is the sort of program that has
gone up, all this kind of stuff.
VAT, property taxes. I don't know how many new property
Almost
taxes
every
there have
tax the
been.
government can move, they've put up, haven't they?
Absolutely, and every day something new happens. So there is no stability, and I think that has been a serious problem for the Greeks. And of course, many of them who have borrowed for their houses have been unable to pay back their loans, let alone the interest rate too, which is quite interesting. So many people are just not servicing their debts. So the size of non-performing loans in the Greek banking sector has rocketed. And of course, now there is a concern about people who own more than one house. If they don't keep up with the payments that they have to make, do they lose that house? And there are all sorts of exemptions coming forward. So if it is your principal residence, you'll be fine. If you own anything else, then you may actually lose that house. So everyone is just trying to rearrange their financial affairs in such a way as to limit some of that cost. And indeed, it is very, very disconcerting to watch people finding that their wealth disappears.
And you were expressing some surprise that the pain that's been implemented by this programme has been largely taken on the chin, but some people have voted with their feet, quite literally, and just left the country.
Absolutely.
And are they not the very people who you might need to have in the country to put it back on the road to prosperity?
There has been a mass exodus of young people with degrees who have gone elsewhere. I think it's measured now in the hundreds of thousands. Many of them have found themselves in the UK, but they've gone all across Europe and further afield as well. And in fact, what we're finding here is certainly I'm doing it, but we're all housing the brain drain of Greece, who are here studying and probably intending to stay here. But everyone wants to go back if they can. Now, of course, there is a lot of encouragement for people to start investing back in Greece. There's a lot of encouragement of starting new businesses. So there are all sorts of bodies being set up to get Greece moving again. So we can't just look at the very negative aspect of it. I think there is also a movement now to see whether you can have more startups, whether the Greeks can use some of the innovative power they
You
have.
see some optimism,
Yes.
opportunity there, do you?
Yes, I think there is quite a lot going on.
Is that not contingent on at least some of this debt being written off, which I know is a political point? President Obama is going to be talking about it, I think, with the Greek senior politicians and probably with Angela Merkel later this week. Is that a realistic prospect in your
I think
view?
Obama is putting some pressure on this, and I think that's good news. I think in terms of the timing of the visit, but also what's going on in Europe right now with Brexit, and of course the Germans not wanting to see the whole EU sort of dismantled. They want to keep Greece in and in the euro as well.
Almost at any price?
Well, it's beginning to look like they would bend over backwards to keep it in. But of course, still on the surface, Greece has to do various things. But I think there's another more important issue, which is that we still have capital controls in Greece. We still haven't seen Greece's debt being part of what the European Central Bank can look at and think that it can actually buy it as part of the quantitative easing program. Once that happens, once this current review of whether Greece has actually done reforms is over, then I think we open up, particularly with some debt relief coming, we open up the door for Greece to be also part of quantitative easing, and that will bring yields down, interest rates down, and Greece may well be capable of going out to the capital markets and borrow again, as it did just a few years ago.
But it's walking the plank, it's walking a tightrope, tight balance here, because what of other unexpected shocks that might come in 6, 12 months' time?
Well, there could be...
And the whole thing just collapses again, I suppose.
Absolutely, plus political tensions in Greece itself, because there is an obvious decline.
A stable government, maybe.
Yes, it's reasonably stable. The president has been. Since admittedly, only since 2015.
There's other governmental change. We don't know what's going to happen in
Yes.
France. We don't know what's going to happen to Angela Merkel herself in Germany, do we? And opinions may change, I suppose, within the 12 months.
Absolutely, and you may suddenly end up with more hawks, if you like, in some of those governments. But I think the trend in Europe is still one of let's get closer together, the countries in the Eurozone in particular, and see how we can withstand all these shocks that are coming. And I think Greece probably will benefit from that.
Okay, thank you for the moment. Stay with us on Insight. Coming up, should we be wary of international organisations bearing gifts? We'll examine the impact of the IMF.